This is a very chilling documentary, and I'm sure everybody is still reeling from the ending because it is a very, very tough pill to swallow. And I want to know, there's tons of archival footage and photography in this work, and I want to know how you approached it, considering there is so much to go through and also so much to report with people you also interviewed.
Well, first I want to say thanks everybody for coming and being here for this. I want to say that there's another screening on Wednesday at 4:15. So please tell people about it. That's our best advertising, and it's also on Showtime. I think that I started thinking about making this film. I don't know, like 20, 30 years ago. I started thinking about making a film about Attica. Because I felt that a lot of the people were still alive, and that a lot of the guys in the prison were so young, they were like 18 to 25 or so, and that they would still be vibrant and alive, and that maybe 10 years from now, instead of being 70 or 75, they would be 80 and 85, and that's a little, sometimes people start losing it at that age. So, although Clarence Jones is 90 something, he's amazing. But, so, I started thinking about it. We knew that there was some footage, a little bit of footage, but we didn't know that there was so much footage. And we just started, collecting footage, and Traci can talk to you about finding people to interview. Traci did all the interviews, and the interviews are just incredible. So she can talk about that.
Yeah, so when I came to the film, I didn't know very much at all about any of this that happened before I was born. I knew, like I think a lot of people knew, about the scene in Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino where he's sort of screaming Attica, and didn't really understand how that was connected to what actually happened, but I understood that something about this event was so resonant in the culture that the mere invocation of the name Attica could sort of bring up all the things that they were trying to get at in that scene. So I was really excited to dig into the story. And so the initial research, it became clear that there were sort of all these categories of people that we wanted to try to talk to for the film. I always say that this story is kind of like that parable of the blind man with the elephant, where they're all touching the same thing, but depending on where they are in relation to it, the experience is different. And so we wanted to really try to get that 360-degree experience from as many people as we could. So obviously we wanted to talk to the former prisoners. We wanted to talk to the people who went in as observers. We wanted to talk to members of the media. That's a huge part of the story. We wanted to talk to the guards who were hostages if we could. And then it was also important that we kind of represent Attica, not just the prison, but this was a village. It's called Attica Village. It was a community. And so we wanted the families of the people that lived in worked in and lived around the prison. And so from there, it was just a matter of sort of methodically, going through each of those categories of people. Every time we found someone, asking someone, do you know anybody else? With the prisoners, what was very helpful was that the settlement that you see them getting at the end, there was a judge, a federal judge, that adjudicated the settlement, and he took the extraordinary step of inviting, this is 2000, of inviting every single surviving prisoner of what happened on the 13th into his courtroom to testify or call in, and there's a transcript of that. It's hundreds of pages. I read through the whole thing and then sort of tried to extrapolate who might still be around, where people are, who has a story to tell, and then it was just a matter of kind of getting on the phone and taking the time to sort of talk to people and get to know folks. And certainly there was a lot of hang-ups and some angry people that are wondering why I was kind of a stranger calling them, asking them to recount in great detail the defining trauma of their life over the phone. People did not love that, but fortunately there were enough people that kind of had the grace and courage to be willing to relive all this. And make no mistake, this is profoundly traumatic for every single person, even the members of the media that experienced it. But luckily, there were enough people that were willing to do it that we were able to get the film that we did.
At the end of this story, it is prisoners who are organizing. And there are many organizers in the room, and we hear from people, and as you mentioned, you've read through a lot of the anecdotes in the legal scripture. I'm wondering, what are some anecdotes that we did not get to see in the final edit of this film that you would like to share with folks today?
Well, I think Stanley and I both felt the day of the retaking, obviously it's very graphic, obviously it's very difficult to watch, as it should be, right, when the government massacres 36 people. But actually what you saw continued that night, and initially we had it in, and I think Stanley kind of felt like, I think that the audience gets it, and there's a certain line beyond which it's just sort of too much and people turn away. But after the prisoners were rehoused, they were psychologically and physically abused. There were guards that came and played Russian roulette with them all night and would just sort of pull the trigger while they're locked into the cell. There were 8 men put naked into a cell meant for one person, where they had to stand up all night, and if they fell, they were threatened. People were dragged out, beaten, and so that continued. But I think at a certain point, it's kind of like, you get it, and then you kind of, it starts to become a little gratuitous, so we didn't put that in.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hard things for us as filmmakers was that we wanted the audience to feel, you know, the pain and to feel what the prisoners had gone through, but we didn't want the audience to feel like we were torturing you, you know, and so we had to kind of strike that balance to where, you know, you kind of really understood and felt it, but you know, you didn't want to kill the filmmakers, you know.
I have one final question, and I'm going to open it up to you folks, so start percolating. Stanley, you said that you've been thinking about this film for a number of years. What did you learn during the making of this documentary that you did not expect?
You know, I learned so much. I mean, you know, I learned everything, you know, about Attica that's in the film. I think, you know, a lot of things. I mean, I learned that, you know, how the prisoners organized, you know, and went from being divided by race to being united as prisoners. I mean, that was a huge step, you know, and that it was really a story about, you know, the powerless fighting the powerful. And also, I learned what I've come to call, you know, the casual racism that you see over and over and over again, from, you know, the guys looking through the telescopic sight and saying, you know, that's the blackest, ugliest Negro gentleman I've ever seen, to, you know, the guys yelling white power, to Nixon, you know, and Rockefeller talking, the first thing they go to is at the blacks, you know, over and over again, this kind of just casual racism, and that's one of the real subtexts of the film. I think everybody gets it. You know, it's also not only about prisoners and prison rights and you know, incarceration, but it's also about race.
All right, folks, I have time for a few questions. Yes, I see this person. Again, questions. Questions, yes.
In your research going through the clips and the audio and whatnot, what did you notice in regard to what was actually going on in the prison and what was being reported to from the media to the public in real time?
Okay, I can just repeat the question. Based off of what you actually saw reported versus what the prisoners were actually telling you folks, did you see any contradicting or differing statements from what you've learned?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that was really interesting to me is that the prisoners ultimately articulated a list of 30 demands that included everything from sort of the sanitary conditions that you hear about in the prison. There were labor demands. Attica was a prison where if you were an able-bodied person, you had to work. You made pennies for that work, so they were demanding minimum wage. There were all of these things, but if you look at a lot of the media reports, as you see in the film, there was a lot of focus on the plane, right? That how dare they think that there was going to be a plane that was going to fly them out of the prison. And I think as it's clear in the film, it was sort of a why not, right? It was kind of a like, well, we asked for the media and they're here, and we asked for observers, so like, let's get on a plane to Cuba. And it was important to us that like the logic of the prisoners makes sense to the viewer, so that's why you see all of these news clips where like, actually at that time, it was not extraordinary for someone to hijack a plane and take it to Algeria, or for political prisoners to kind of escape on planes. So there was like a logic to what they were saying, but the news reports kind of focused on this sensational, as the media does, right? It was like the shiny object amongst what the prisoners were asking for. So I thought that was really interesting. And another thing thing that I think actually had real consequences was that the media was reporting these lies that the prisoners were torturing the hostages, right? So there were media reports that hostages were being castrated, that Big Black in particular castrated, one of the hostages. There were reports that hostages were being pushed off the balconies. It was all lies, but it was all getting reported in the media, and that is part of what sort of riles up this group of state troopers that are outside for 4 days. They have no training. They really don't want to be there. There's racial animus as law enforcement. They don't like the prisoners anyway, and they look at the guards inside as their brothers in arms, and in some cases they're literal brothers. There was a state trooper whose brother was one of the guards inside. And I think the media report really helped to kind of exacerbate those already existing tensions. So there was like a lot of that we saw.
Yeah, but I also want to add, though, as bad as the media was many times in reporting Attica, the fact that the media was there and the fact that the prisoners allowed the media to come in and invited the media to come in allowed us to make the film that you see, because, it's just incredible footage. It's like, moment by moment of this prison rebellion, with, in full color and with full sound. And it was the media being in there that allowed us to make this film, so that, you see it and you feel it, and there's not just people talking about it. And that's one of the things that's so different about Attica.
Yes, right in there in the middle.
When did you, brilliant film, it was really intense, thank you for putting it together. When did you come to the realization that you could use LD's speech as a way to kind of give us the backstory of how you got to this point?
Okay.
Oh, that's the greatest question of ever. You get the prize. I'm going to buy you some popcorn. We worked on that forever. We had this unit of going into the backstory. That was a unit, and we put it at the beginning of the film, and it didn't work. And we put it somewhere else, and it didn't work. And then we saw that LD's speech just kind of naturally went backwards, and naturally we could go back because he's talking about the causes of the rebellion. And then we found that guy, who says that great statement, there's factory towns and there's college towns, and Attica's a prison town. We're like, okay, great. So we found a way to go back to tell you why they were there, because we really wanted to start, like, just throw you into the middle of the rebellion. And then hopefully, you're just so into it that you don't really think too much about, well, wait a minute, why are they rebelling? And then later on we tell you. And so LD's speech really was kind of a godsend to kind of send us back.
Yes, right here.
Your film was gripping and powerful. Did you incredibly try to use different parts of the film to show the desensitization of the humanity of Black men that were in the prison? You're showing the pork being fed to the Muslims. You're showing the walking over the glass sort of near the end. It almost sort of realized the conditions that they were under. Was that like an intentional thread that you tried to lead in? I mean, even showing the suburban enclave outside as if they weren't really a prison town. And I just thought it was incredibly moving.
Just to repeat the question so everybody can hear, were there moments that you intentionally plugged in anecdotes of the torture and the maliciousness of the prison guards to further contextualize the situation of Attica, the suburban village, versus Attica, a prison that is predominantly filled of Black men?
I'm not sure. I think more it was that, every time they came into contact with the guards, and with the authorities in the prison, it was not good, and so, from being fed pork to, one roll of toilet paper a month to just the little indignities, that they had before the rebellion, and then after, when they retook the prison, just the horrors of the retaking.
Yes, right here.
Thank you for the important film. I struggle as an aspiring filmmaker to ask questions from my subjects.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Tracy really talk about this because she really did the interviews. But you know, Tracy would write the questions, and she would like have like 10 pages of questions, and I'd be like, okay, like cut it down to I don't remember what the number was, like 3 or 4, you know, like just or you know just do A B C questions, you know, so you get all the A's first. But Tracy can really talk about
Yeah,
the preparation.
I snuck some of them back in there. I think, yeah, so by the time we got to the point where we were kind of sitting down talking on camera, I'd already had 1 or 2 lengthy conversations over the phone with these people. And in some ways, this is kind of weird to say, but the pandemic helped because we were just sort of all in I was like all of us in my little box. And so I just had time and space to just be on the phone with these people. And I guess what I tried to do was to be as transparent as possible with folks. So, you know, certainly one of the, Don, who you see, was extremely skeptical. In fact, when he finally came to the shoot, I think he'd actually Googled Stanley the night before, and he kind of was like, "Ooh, this seems super black, and you're black, and you might have some biases against me." So, you know, what I tried to do was to be extremely understanding about where people were coming from. I tried to recognize the fact that pretty much not even pretty much everyone in the film, there is an identity gap between me and them, right? So I'm younger, I'm black, I'm a woman. There's nobody that has the same like intersection of identities in the film that I do. And so I understood in some cases that maybe that could be a barrier and try to be mindful of it. There was one point where one of the prisoners referenced some Western where he was trying to describe what it was like in DR that came on, and I guess my face was a blank. And then he totally disengaged in the interview and was like, "Oh, you know, you're young, you don't know, you know." And so it was trying to be mindful of that and just be really present with people. But what I really tried to do was just to let people know what my and Stanley's intentions were for these slices of their lives that they were sharing with us. I tried to be mindful and acknowledge to everybody that I recognize this is a trauma, and what I'm asking of you is no small thing, and I'm so grateful that they're willing and able to share this. And then, you know, once we sort of structured the questions to kind of get all of the story beats, my job was to try to get out of the way as much as possible. It's interesting, I've gotten a couple of questions and Q&As about, well, what did you say to get the prisoners to be that way? And to some extent, it's just, like, that's just who those guys are. And I think one of the things that I'm actually most proud about in the film is that, you know, the intersection of identities that these men, they're prisoners, they're older, they're men, most of them are men of color, like any one of those things, you don't get this level of vulnerability and emotion regularly, right? But especially not from people that exist at the intersection of all of those identities. And so I think in some ways, who they are really makes the point that they were trying to make during the rebellion. Like, you see the shades of their personalities. You can tell some of them are more reserved. You can see the fear, you can see the rage, you can see the shame, you can see all of the spectrum of human emotions, right? Which is ultimately the thing that they were demanding recognition for. So some of it was just trying to kind of structure it and be clear with people, and then some of it was just getting out of the way and letting people communicate it, you know, and re-experience it however they felt it and whatever was authentic to them.
Another question. Wow. Oh, so sorry. I was missing you. Yes, over here.
What was the spark that said to you, I want to find that National Guardsman? Because he was just so different from most of the other interviews. How did you say, oh my God, the National Guard were there, and find something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from the beginning, we wanted the National Guards. We wanted some of the hostages and some of the guards in the prison. Tracy can kind of quickly talk you through that, but we didn't get them. But we knew that we wanted them, and the National Guard agreed to do it because they were very different from the other guys. You know, they were sent in to kind of do medical evacuation. And they, you know, they're very, very emotional about it because they were, as one guy says, you know, they're in a situation that they knew was horrible and they knew that was wrong, but they couldn't stop it. You know, what? They were told not to talk about it, but they couldn't. You know, what are you going to do? Go up against 500 men with guns? You know, they couldn't do anything, and so they're very, very emotional, very torn to this day about that.
Yeah, so I spent as much time trying to get the guards and other civilian employees who had been hostages as I did anybody else in the film. Ended up talking to 5 of them, got 3 of them to agree to be in the film, spoke to all of them at length about their whole experience. And over the course of months, actually, and 2 days before we were supposed to shoot them, they individually, but I later found out collectively, canceled. And I will not get into the various reasons that they gave for that. I think some of it had to do with their feeling that there is highly visible public criticism of law enforcement right now, and they were sensitive about being on a platform like this in that environment, and that is what I will say about that. But as far as the National Guardsmen are concerned, I think one or both of those guys testified for the prisoners in the lawsuits that happened afterwards. And it was interesting because one of the things that one of them told me was that they were surprised that the National Guard had not been called in to do the retaking, because the state police, they have no training whatsoever. These are the people that pull you over for a speeding ticket on the highway. They knew nothing about this, and the National Guard was especially sensitive about the kind of restraint that would need to be shown in this because Kent State had just happened the year before. And so that was very much front of their minds. And he also told me that when they were sort of mobilizing to deploy to Attica, there was some commander that pointed out people amongst that group of National Guardsmen who were known to have racial animus and say, you can't go into Attica, because they were mindful of exactly what it was that ended up happening. So I think they just felt very comfortable to speak because their position in it, even though they all sort of feel guilty, like we could have done more, we should have done more, they were not actively involved in the killing that first happened.
Another question? Yes.
I have physical I physically experienced this watching the documentary, sat and cried. So I just want to thank you guys for sharing something that, and coming in, I didn't think I was gonna feel, because TV and media has kind of desensitized us to these spaces. But watching documentaries, I'm always interested to know what are your objectives that you want the audience to feel. I know what I felt and I know what I've experienced, but I would love to know when you were creating this, what was the objective that you were hoping that you could impart to people like myself who watch today?
I was just hoping that you'd feel something, you know, and I really, you know, I didn't have any set thing that I wanted you to feel or wanted you to do, but I wanted you to feel something, you know, and so yeah.
Tracy?
You know, I don't think, just in terms of takeaways or any answers that the film offers, I think the issues that the film kind of deals with are so intractable that no one film can really offer, I don't think, any answers. But I do hope that maybe it prompts people to ask some questions, right, about what we are willing to allow supposedly in the name of our safety or feeling safe, right? So in the film, the government narrative, the state's narrative is that in order for there to be law and order, in order for us to feel safe, what you see happening on the 13th is what's necessary. The massacre of 30-something people is the cost that you have to accept if you want to be safe, right? And I think that we can look at the system that we have today that one could argue also does violence to people, both economically as well as physically, psychologically, in all these ways. There's 2 million people that are warehoused in the prison system. And so I hope that the film can prompt people today to kind of grapple with those same questions. Is this what we are willing to accept in our name? Are we actually safer, or does it make us feel safe? How much of the prison system we have today is because of a profit motive? How much of the prison system we have today is because we don't want to deal with the real fundamental things that cause crime, which are about equity and justice and education and healthcare and all of these things. Are we okay with a system that uses prison to treat mental illness and addiction? Anyway, I could go on, but I think what I would hope that people do is use the film as an invitation and an opportunity to kind of reconsider anew and grapple with some of those difficult questions about the system that we have today.
Yes.
I apologize.
Yeah, Che is Puerto Rican. Che, who's the last person to speak is Puerto Rican.
Yeah, he was a member of the Young Lords inside Attica. Yeah, yeah.
Do we have another audience question? All right. Well, again, can we please get a round of applause for our two filmmakers?
We just announced it. Thank you so much. I just want to say once again, the film is playing here at Doc NYC on Wednesday at 4:15. Traci and I are going to be here doing Q&A again. So please let people know, because I think it's a really great film to see on the big screen, and it's on Showtime. So you can see it anytime you want. Thank you so much.
Thank you, folks. Have a good night, and see you soon.